forget too, you have Teenage Boss, the ABC TV show, you write books. It's not as if there's only one thing that you do. I'm happy to say we're already getting some questions in. We sort of answered the question about your life. Well, no, this is quite a direct question from Renee. So if you weren't a maths teacher, so it's a bit similar to what I've just asked you, but I don't know, do you harbour a secret desire, that maybe you'd like to share with us here? We won't tell.
Oh, yeah, no, obviously. I mean, this is quite private, but look, I got two thoughts in my mind. The first one is sort of this childhood dream I had that I wanted to be a firefighter growing up, and I just thought, like, it's such a heroic thing to do, and, you can help, communities. It's so wonderful. I then learned, I mentioned briefly before that I had some health issues when I was younger. One of them is that I'm a chronic asthmatic. I'm better at managing it now, but it's still an issue. And so I learned that, being a firefighter and frequently going into places filled with smoke, not the greatest profession for someone with asthma like mine. So that's maybe a bit of a frivolous thing to say. Honestly, the thing that I would love most to do if I weren't a teacher is to be a stay-at-home dad. My kids, like, I just constantly think about the privilege it is to raise young children, not so young children now, to be able to give them love, an environment where they know they're cared for, where they know that there are people in their lives who believe in them and will support them to do whatever it is that they can do to serve their communities and grow and flourish in themselves. What a joy that is. And I constantly feel like that's the thing that I would want to spend more time doing if I weren't doing all the rest of the things.
Great. Eddie, what do you struggle with?
I think I struggle with how much time do you say we have, Jane? I struggle with so many things. Probably one of the biggest ones that I struggle with is kind of this undercurrent of guilt, I guess, around all of the things that I don't do. I feel in a wonderfully privileged position that I get the opportunity to do lots of different things. But whenever I think about all the things I could do, I think about the things that I don't. So as a really, obvious example, there are 2,215 schools in public schools, I should say, in New South Wales. And I've probably worked directly with about a quarter of them, which sounds like a lot in one sense. It's like, wow, 500 schools, that's a fair few. But at the same time, it's kind of like, wow, 75% of the state I haven't even begun to touch because I'm one human being, and there's only so much that a single person can do. I already mentioned the time that I would love to spend. There's kind of this bottomless pit of things I would love to do with my family, and I struggle with that, and I struggle with sometimes the paralyzing feeling that gives me of, I can't do all of it. Should I even bother with any of it? And sometimes I go into little valleys of that, particularly when life and work are hard. So that's, I think, an overarching struggle that I've had all the way through my life.
Thank you. Vicky has asked, what was the kindness or support that you received sometime from someone unexpected, and how did that change your life? That's a great question, Vicky.
Wow, that's a big one. Look, yeah, I'm thinking of a bunch of different people, and I couldn't pick out just one because it wouldn't be fair to the range of people who've done this to me. But I often think, I mentioned before that I'm a classic introvert, but as a teacher, you kind of have to learn a lot of traditionally extroverted skills like communication and forming relationships with people, developing rapport and that kind of thing. And so I guess what sort of comes along with that territory, and I think this is something that we all do in, ways, shapes and forms, is you kind of develop a bit of a persona. Like you kind of put on a suit, and this is who I am in front of other people. And you kind of have different suits and personas for different groups of people you interact with. One of the things which I think I learned from a young age when I experienced bullying, like you mentioned from primary school, is that there are certain places or groups of people where if you are vulnerable, with them, you will end up really hurt. And it's not a nice thing to reckon with, but it's also reality. And so I think from that early age, I thought, my coping mechanism, I guess, was to hide, to think about my real deep inner personality and to say that's not something that I want to be necessarily out there in the open, because that will be ridiculed and it will be, attacked and hated. And so I think where I've experienced those surprising kindnesses, that is what the question was about, is all those many times that so many people throughout my life have found out, have sort of discovered me and gotten to know me better, and instead of pulling away and being sort of shocked or not wanting to know me, it's like, that's fine, actually have known and appreciated me more. That's a really special experience, and I'm very grateful that that's happened a number of times to me. So for all of those people who've let me see that part of myself that actually can be loved and valued, there's nothing else I can say except thank you.
Well, that's a wonderful insight, Eddie. Thank you for that. Malika, or Milicha, I'm sorry if I've said that wrong, has said you're inspirational and you set a great example. Do you have any specific methods to encourage the kids you teach to be kinder?
Wow, that's a delightful question. I think the biggest thing that always comes to the front of my mind is I always want my students to recognize the impact that they have on other people. I think that this is actually something that harks back to, this is a really strange connection to make, but I'm a mathematics teacher and these are the things whizzing around in my mind. I don't know if, Jane, the phrase the butterfly effect is something you've ever heard of. It's an idea in mathematics and physics, which is that sometimes, in some situations, a very small tweak in one spot can actually have enormous effects elsewhere. So the butterfly effect is named after a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the ocean, and that little current of air just grows and grows and grows into a mighty wind and becomes a typhoon on the other side of the ocean. Now that sounds like a fairly negative way to say it, but I think, and this is what I try and encourage my students to do, I think we can think of that positively as well. The smallest acts of kindness can sometimes have really profound effects on the people around us. And I feel very thankful that a number of times my ex-students have returned back to school to say hello. They've been dropping in, saying hi to all of their past teachers. And sometimes they'll relay to me a story of some interaction I had with them that made some very deep impression on them. And often, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, it's an interaction or a conversation I don't remember. And it's not just because I have a bad memory, I promise. It's sometimes the smallest things. A conversation I had with a student just as the bell went and we walked out of that class together, out to lunch, and instead of me, just making a beeline for the staff room, I actually happened to walk with this student to wherever he or she was having lunch with their friends, and I just had that conversation with them over a couple of minutes. That was such a small thing. I do that all the time because it feels natural to spend this very, precious time with these students, trying to encourage them and give them a positive influence. But to know that that can have a very deep and lasting effect on someone, that's pretty special. And I always want my students to take that lesson away from their time at school.
Wow, Eddie, thank you. We have about 6 minutes left to go, and Jane asks, not this one, do you think that kindness solves most problems encountered in the classroom and playground and possibly the world, or is that stretching it too much?
I'm an optimist, so I can definitely come alongside the idea that kindness, especially undeserved kindness, like when I was talking about forgiveness before, it is powerful and it can have really deep and amazing effects, not just on an individual, but indeed on a whole class, a school, a society. I do want to recognize, though, that sometimes the problems that we face around us, to reckon with their reality, a simple kind act sometimes isn't enough, and I don't want us to imagine that some of the systemic problems around us can simply be solved by one act here or another. I think, for example, and the fact that I often work with regional schools across New South Wales, and in rural and remote settings, sometimes the challenges that communities face out there are far deeper and run further into a community's past, its history. They're far more profound than can simply be undone by a few individual acts here and there. We have to reckon with the fabric of society, the history that's brought us here, and the things that have been done that we need to reckon with. I mean, it was recently NAIDOC Week, and I think about when the apology to the stolen generations was given. That was a powerful marker, and it was a start of a conversation. But that in itself was not enough. It's just a symbol, right? So I guess I want to recognize the impact of kindness, but also want to wrestle with the fact that sometimes we have to be thoughtful and creative and determined in how we show that kindness, not just individual acts, but across our entire culture and society.